I'm going to ask for the intercession of the saint for today because he was known for his preaching also. He preached in the region of Apulia in Italy. St. Francis Anthony Fassini. Okay. So pray for us. But she from her poverty has offered her whole livelihood. This is the key of the gospel today. Why, you may ask? We can see that those who were rich gave out of their surplus, and she who was poor gave all she had. I'm not going to stand here and try to explain to all of you what poverty means. Poverty of treasure, spiritual poverty, poverty of time. There have been debates for ages in the Franciscan order on what poverty means. But here today, the gospel gives us a beautiful example of how we can offer our whole livelihood to the Lord. What is it that we are holding back from the Lord? Can we offer him all the good of ourselves and all the bad? His love is so immense. He sees our minority and still loves us without measure. Each of our lives is a penny compared to the vast riches of his love for us. Maybe some of us are not even worth a penny. What is our minority, you may ask? I have heard some friars in my 8 years in the order that minority can also be found in the scriptures. Jesus himself took on minority when he became a man. Even St. John the Baptist could be seen as taking on minority when he said, "He must increase and I must decrease." In the letter to the Galatians as well, the writer takes on a form of minority when he writes, "I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me." The first reading offers us a different picture of Daniel and his 3 buddies, whom we should be very familiar with. This comes from the Sunday week 1 of the scriptures, of the Liturgy of the Hours. Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. This account seems completely opposite of the gospel message for today. When the king had spoken with all of them, none was found equal. What is the link between the first and the gospel readings? Were not Daniel and his friends bowed down to the king of Babylon? In the woman's poverty, was there none found equal with her? This was her greatness. She did not have to carry the burden of wealth. We see many in our society today who almost unknowingly carry the burden of wealth, some of whom are even in power in capitals around the world. God himself has a preferential option for the poor. His Anoim are the most precious and dear to his heart. The Hebrew word Anoim means one who is bowed down. This woman in her poverty was bowed down, economically speaking, but that did not stop her from giving all to God. If we see the first reading, though, it seems that Daniel and his friends are quite the opposite of God's Anoim. It describes them as of royal blood and of the nobility, young men without any defect, handsome, intelligent and wise, quick to learn and prudent in judgment, such as could take their place in the king's palace. The poor widow of the gospel, on the other hand, was bowed down to the men and women of her day. Who today is bowed down to the kings of the earth today? Who is bowed down spiritually or economically speaking today? Are the poor on our own streets bowed down? Are the nations who are suffering from war also bowed down? What about those nations throughout the world that are suffering from abject poverty? Does God want us as religious people to go out to all the world and stand with those who are living in such terrible conditions? Just here in the United States today, there are many who are below the economic poverty line. As the cost of living goes up, incomes stay the same. Even some military families who serve on the base next door to us here cannot make ends meet and must seek help from charitable organizations like Father Joe's Village and Brother Benno's. There is something about the poor, though, that is freeing in this gospel passage. She who did not have much for the Lord freely gave all she had. but those who gave out of their surplus found it difficult to give out of their need. This can be a lesson for us today in detachment from the things in our world that are not so important. The poor around the world live and are happy where they are and with the things they have. There is a simplicity in the faces of some of them. They live free from attachments to the latest gadgets, the latest fads, the latest trends. They don't have Pokemon Go. They don't have fidget spinners. They don't have a copy of the latest Star Wars movie. They don't even have a year-long pass to the happiest place on earth, Disneyland. There is a sense of freedom if we live detached from the world, not living in contempt of the world and condemning the world, but living out of the world and being a part of it. We are in the world, but not of the world. We can live simply and teach others to do so as well. We can use this poor widow of the gospel today as an example of how to shed ourselves from our own desires and make it our life's mission to please the Lord and serve others. St. Francis lived out his life as such. He shed himself of literally everything he owned because he saw in living out poverty that he could live free. The incident with his father and stripping himself naked in front of the bishop comes to my mind. He called God his Father and walked away from the world at that moment. He gave all he had back to his Father, even the very clothes on his back. He said, "I no longer call Pietro Bernardone my father." Then he went to live among the lepers, whom he once despised. Let us pray to God our Father in the spirit of the poor widow and of St. Francis, that we today too, who follow the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience, can fruitfully live out our vows. Let us not parade our vows for all to see, but live simply and honestly. Let us give our whole livelihood to you, Lord. Let us give our whole hearts to you. Let us give our entire being and all that we are to you. Help us, Lord, to love your Anoim, who hold a special place in your most sacred heart. Let us hold them in our hearts as well, and never shun them or forsake them. Deus caritas est.